also one of the things that is important is to recognize those accomplishments that we've had. And I want to really raise my hands to Doris and acknowledge her for the PhD, the honorary PhD that she received for all of her lifelong work in this area. And I know that
Well
we are
deserved.
humble people, but I think it's important to acknowledge that. And in that line, I also wanted to ask each one of you, are there things that you are proud of thinking about your journey in HIV activism? What are those things that you're proud of? Doris, let's start with you.
Okay, well, thank you for um, telling everybody about the honorary doctorate that I received. I don't necessarily go around and talk about it to anybody very much or hardly at all. It was really really about acknowledging my contributions to Indigenous health research, why I was awarded that distinction. And so I'm going to go to, something I'm really proud of. It's really about having that persistent voice in the movement and being very vocal in the movement about, that we needed to focus on women like myself that are living with HIV and include women in the movement, create spaces for them to have dialogue with each other and come up with their own solutions to the lack of services that are tailored for women, Indigenous women living with HIV, because there was no spaces like that. And so I was very persistent, and out of my persistence, there was a women's committee that was formed, that was reinvigorated at CAN, called the Voices of Women. And we worked together, and these women came from different parts of the country, across the country. And one of our first tasks was to really kind of formulate a women's strategy, to respond to HIV and AIDS that was impacting Indigenous women at the time. At the time, around that time, the rates of HIV test reports were really high. Women were overrepresented in the HIV surveillance reports. And I also recall at one point that it was about a 65% prevalence rate that was connected to injection drug use. And so it was quite alarming, the statistics that were coming out about, the impacts of HIV and women. And so we continued doing our work, and with the VOW committee, I facilitated their engagement, and they also wanted to have standing committee status instead of being an ad hoc committee. So Laverne Monette actually helped us to write a resolution that was presented and unanimously passed at CAN that recognized VOW as a standing committee. A standing committee means it's a permanent committee, and within the organization, and a permanent committee of the board. And so that was through persistence and through real passionate and driven advocacy that happened. And then we got involved in research, because there was very little research about HIV positive Indigenous women at that time. And maybe there were 3 projects that had been done. And one of them was a project about the families. And And so we really pushed for research, and now I'm really proud to say that we have a huge amount of Indigenous women's research happening across the country. So, you know, those of us that were involved at that time, we really lit that fire for that to happen. And we also pushed for, you know, the way Western research is done, it was consistently pathologizing Indigenous people. And, you know, by always unpacking our deficits and presenting us as people in need of help. And we started to push back on that as women. And we said there's more to the story than just our trauma. Let's focus on our strengths to balance this out. And then the strengths-based methods started to be implemented into research. And I believe there's been a paradigm shift in terms of how we do community-based research now. Every community-based research project now introduces strengths-based methods into their research designs. And I really believe we women had a role in that. And I was the consistent voice, always raising that and pushing back against the pathologizing of Indigenous people. So I'm really proud of that.
As you should be. There's lots of achievements in what you've just shared, and I know there's still a long way to go for greater equity, but there's lots to celebrate in the work that you have done and your colleagues have done. So thank you for sharing that. Trevor, are there pieces that you want to share with us today around your journey in the activism movement?
Well, actually, the pieces that I'm most proud of are the work that we've done together as the three amigos, Rene, Doris, and I. No, seriously, like, for example, the caucus of Indigenous people living with HIV hosted by CAN. That was an incredibly powerful experience. Doris and I were co-facilitators and liaisons for Indigenous people living with HIV. And every year, sometimes even twice a year, we'd have a 1 or 2 day meeting of Indigenous people living with HIV. And we would ask them, what do you want? We would ask them, choose your leaders. Let's have an election to have representation on the board. We would have orientation when they came in. We would have ceremony, giveaway ceremonies. And we would make new friends and meet relatives that we haven't met before, like cousins and sisters and aunties. And it became, you know, CAN, the network part of CAN, the last word, networks. We really were a network of people with lived experience. And that was very powerful. And Rene, you were part of that too. I believe you were a co-chair of the caucus for a while, which meant you were a board member as well. And it was just so powerful. When there's something magical that happens when Indigenous people living with HIV come together to talk about the issue. It's safe. There's no stigma around HIV. It's gone. It's one of the only places where we can go. It's this bubble. And then we'd leave and go home again, but our batteries would be charged so we could do the good fight back at home and advocate for people living with HIV. So that's the one thing. The other thing is some of the graphic facilitation that I learned from Rene, and you know, doing these consultations and making this big map on the wall that's very artsy, very art, and lots of cool things. And they're telling us what kind of symbols and what kinds of things they want to see, and we look at what we want to do in 2 years. I don't want to get too far into it, but that's another magical experience where we all did this together. And we had these 4 years in a row, we had these First Nations APHA summits. And it was run and led by and for Indigenous peoples. And I really have to thank the Ontario First Nations HIV/AIDS Education Circle for allowing us to do that and giving us that space. That is so That's not often where we're allowed to have our own space and we run with it. You know, we have the football, we're going for the touchdown. It felt good.
We
Yeah,
organized.
And you know, people still talk about that, and I still remember when you were talking about the caucus. I think it was in Sault Ste. Marie where the circle provided us a space to go to a room and come up with a wish list. And I just remembered Trevor on his computer just tapping away at our wish list. And you know, it took us a few years to keep on pushing to get that funding, but eventually we did get the funding to have that gatherings, and people still talk about it to this day. So I think that's something, if I was going to mention what I'm proud of, would definitely have to be that, for sure.
Oh yeah, and through those summits too, leading up to the summits, we should also be proud about the Chiefs of Ontario passing a resolution unanimously, what we call the GIPA resolution, the Greater Involvement of Indigenous People Living with HIV resolution.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and that was exciting when we found out it was a unanimous resolution that was passed. It was awesome, and I got to be there to witness that. That was awesome.
Chimi Gwetch for sharing. There's so many things to celebrate and so many achievements that have happened, and it's certainly a testament to all of the work and activism that the three of you have done. And also a good reminder for us today to continue carrying that work forward. You can certainly see the imprint that the three of you have left in the sector. It's still with us today, and we still have a lot of commitments that we need to move forward on.